Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up, feeling refreshed this morning. Today's a bit chilly out there. It's about 38 degrees. Thought I'd just bring it inside today and invite you into my home and just do our Seize the Days, from my kitchen table. So I trust you guys are either just getting up or maybe finishing a workout, getting ready for work. But I'm glad that you've invited me to be a part of your mornings. We have been in this study here on in the Gospel of Matthew, and we're in the midst of a study that it's taking us through Matthew's chapter 14 through chapter 16, with a particular emphasis on the varied responses that Jesus has been getting to his ministry. I think that is helpful because it gives us a realism to this spiritual warfare that is going on in the world in which we're living. Sometimes we have a tendency to oversimplify things, that if we just do it this way, if that person's in a position of authority, if these rules are passed, then everything will be fine. And we don't realize that the roots of this conflict go very, very deeply. Jesus is reminding us that throughout his whole ministry, this is what Jesus has been trying to teach us, is that there is this conflict between God's will and the pattern of this world, and they are in conflict. Jesus has come to resolve that kind of conflict and to bring this path of redemption. That path has a lot to do with our actions, but it really at its root has as the catalyst for all that the condition of one's heart. It's recognizing, as Jesus would remind us in this passage just previous to the one we're looking at today, that that it's what comes out of a man's heart that makes him unclean, right? Because the heart is the genesis for all of one's actions, right? This controlling part of who we are, this mind, this heart, it's the center of one's thoughts and emotions. And God's saying, out of that comes all of, and he gives us a whole long list now, right? In verse 20. Evil thoughts and murders and theft and adulteries and immoralities, slander. Like, it's because it's from the heart. And unless the heart is redeemed, then we're always going to be subject to our own sinful natures. Jesus is coming to say, look, let me give you a new heart. Let me give you a new perspective. Let me help you to think through the implications of what is going on within yourself and in the world at large. And all of these things is, I think, really important for you and me as we begin to grow deeper in our walk with Jesus. So one of the things, what I'd like to do first is I'd like for us to just spend a moment looking at the passage again that we looked at this past weekend. And as we open it up together, I'd like to read it. And then I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about God's priorities in this work of redemption, because it will help us understand a little bit more, I think, about what Jesus is saying in the passages that are before us. What you find in the passages is that Jesus is beginning to give us some clarity again into this work that God has established for us. And so when we look at, for instance, Matthew 15, and if you would, you could turn there with me. We begin with verse 21. Jesus had been confronted by the Pharisees and the teachers of the law from Jerusalem, right? He leaves this place. He withdraws to a region of Tyre and Sidon. We have seen those to be the coastal cities on the Mediterranean, very wealthy, just a major trade route. that would bring the spices and good commodities from the Near East, and then through Tyre and Sidon, just ship them out to the rest of the known world. Very lucrative. They became capital cities during the Assyrians and Persians, right on down to the Greeks and the Romans. So very highlighted cities, ones that never really came under the umbrella of the nation of Israel, but were always contentious and many times out and out enemies of the nation of Israel. So it's a Canaanite community, right? This is all Gentiles. So a Gentile woman, a Canaanite woman from that vicinity, comes to Jesus, cries out, "Lord, Son of God, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." We're not, Matthew's style is one in which he begins to, he truncates a lot of stories. He's like the Reader's Digest version sometimes of the biblical stories. Mark, for instance, will take some of these stories and elaborate on them, giving us more and more insight. But but we have to keep in mind that Matthew is writing for a different purpose. Matthew is writing for us to understand that Jesus is the Messiah that had been promised. He is the Son of God who has come to bring redemption to humanity and to the world, right? To creation itself. And so this work that Jesus is doing always has to be front and center. So now what we just seen is Jesus came to his hometown in Capernaum and they rejected him. The big shots from Jerusalem come up and they too dismiss Jesus. And so Jesus now leaves here, and now he's in Gentile territory where a Gentile woman comes up to him. And what's strange about not only the fact that Jesus is there, but also the fact that that she addresses Jesus with a term of reverence, calling him Lord, and then also not only a term of reference and deference, right? She's deferring to Jesus, but she calls him Son of David, which again was a title that was used for the Messiah, the promised one, who Israel had been looking to come with great expectation. And so she comes with this great need, and perhaps it's Jesus' reputation that has already reached the seacoast, letting them know that Jesus has demonstrated authority, not only in his words, but in his actions, that he has demonstrated that he is this Messiah that has been promised. And so maybe this Gentile, she doesn't have all the baggage that the Israelites did to overcome. She doesn't have the Pharisees and the scribes chirping in her ear, telling her why Jesus isn't who he says he is. But in a one verse, introduction, we find her addressing Jesus as Messiah, and she's there for a very serious reason, one that no doubt is just breaking her heart as she sees its devastating effect that it's having on her child. But then uncharacteristically, Jesus doesn't say a word. And so his disciples then just say, "Lord, why don't we just send her away? For she keeps crying out after us." So you get this woman not only comes with a really heartfelt need, and we know from past experiences already that Jesus can meet this need. He's already, demonstrated that he has power, right, over these satanic forces. But he's silent, uncharacteristic. This woman is persistent. And the disciples, well, they just want to dismiss her. They are not there. They are not catching on that they are also part of this work that Jesus has promised. Remember all the way back in chapter 10, Jesus summoned the 12 and he gave them authority to cast out spirits, right? To engage in this work. They are not, obviously, this text here, it's not, you don't hear any of them stepping up to the plate, right? Trying to lean in on this authority that Jesus has given them. They just want to send her away because she keeps crying out after us, which is interesting to me because this also shows me they're going to be called to be his representatives in the world. These disciples are ambassadors of hope. They are now being sent, and Jesus will tell them specifically, just like he's going to tell them now in verse 24, I want you to go to the household of Israel first. And because they need to know that this Messiah that had been promised, generation after generation of generation, is now present in the person of Jesus. That message needs to get out because Jesus is going to do only what only the Messiah could do, and that is to give his life a ransom for his people. You remember Isaiah 53, a great text that reminds us again of the suffering servant. This suffering servant, this Messiah that God says, it says, on him would be laid the iniquity of us all. By his stripes we would be healed. So they may not have it fully in their understanding about the work that Jesus is actually come to accomplish, but this is a learning period, and here is another moment when Jesus is calling them out and demonstrating to them and to this woman something about who he is and something about the role in which they ought to play. So with her persistence and the disciples' reluctance, Jesus says to them, he says, look, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. And we saw that yesterday, that it is true. Galatians 4:4, right? It says, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, born of a virgin, right? Born under the law, that he might redeem those under the law. So the Messiah was coming in a very prescribed, in a very prescribed way. Remember early on in Matthew's gospel, it was revealed to us that all the events surrounding Jesus' life were actually fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, going all the way back to the fact that he would be born of a virgin. Remember when the angels come and share that this child would be that was conceived in Mary was of the Holy Spirit, so that it would be fulfilled what the prophet said, that the virgin shall be with child and you shall call him Emmanuel, meaning God with us. Now you begin to realize, like, oh, this is the way in which this is going to happen. Or how about when the Magi come and they ask Herod, where is he who is born King of the Jews? And Jesus calls the teachers of the law, right, the scribes, and he asks them, he says, where is it prophesied that the Messiah would be born? And they tell him in Bethlehem, as the prophet said, O Bethlehem, the least of the clans of Israel, out of you who will come forth one who will shepherd my people Israel. So all of these things you begin to realize again. Or the opening line in Matthew's gospel where it says, this is the genealogy of Jesus, of Jesus Christ, right? Jesus, the Messiah, son of Abraham, son of David. So when Jesus is saying here in verse 24, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel, on one hand, that is true. That is where it will begin. But it will have far-reaching implications. And that goes all the way back to the promise that God made to Abraham when he said, Abraham, through you and your descendants, I will bless all the nations of the world. So it was always God's intention for the Savior, the Redeemer, this Messiah, to come through the nation of Israel, fulfilling all of the promises that he made to them, but then those promises would have impact on the world around them. And that path of salvation would be opened up to male, female, slave, free, Gentile, Jew, right? It would be opened up to the nations. So when you read this, his silence should take you back a little bit. Now his answer takes you a little back because Jesus already has been healing Gentiles. So it intrigues you as to why he would be doing that, which is why I think that when you read this text, this is more about Jesus just playing a little hard to get, trying to reveal something about what's going on in this woman's life, something about how she is perceiving Jesus, and also the way in which Jesus is using this to instruct his disciples. So at this point, the woman comes and kneels before Jesus. And again, she addresses him with this term of esteem, Lord. She goes, help me. And then here's the thing. Jesus says, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. So he uses this analogy of a pet, right? And people taking, is it right when you prepare dinner that, you feed the dog first before you feed your children? If they were all eating the same food, right? Like you would take care of your kids first and then you would feed the dog. Now, I know some of you love your dog more than you do your kids, and I totally get it. But Jesus' point is that the priority here, right, is really for your children and then the pets. And but it comes across so harsh, doesn't it? And if you were this woman, you could easily be offended and just walk away. And yet, notice her response here. She doesn't argue with Jesus. She doesn't make her take issue with the fact that what Jesus is implying here is what he just said, right? I've come to the lost sheep of Israel. But she says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And Jesus answered, woman, you have great faith, and your request is granted. And her daughter, well, she was healed from that very hour. So think about this now. Her response is, yes, the Messiah is coming to his people. But that Messiah is also one that can bless all the nations of the world. So you know what I thought I would do with our remaining time this morning is I want to introduce you to a topic. And if I don't have enough time to finish it today, then I'll finish it tomorrow. But there is a woman that teaches at Gordon Conwell, and she came up with a way of looking at this whole story, this whole redemptive story that Jesus put together, and or that Jesus is disclosing, and actually going all the way from the beginning to the end. And she has this term that she used, and it's called casket empty. And it's a way of looking at all of the Old Testament and giving you a framework on how all of these things really come together. So I thought what would be helpful is she uses this as an acronym for various topics. So, for instance, let's look here through this first casket, right? And you'll see I'm going to put down a few things here for you to see, and hopefully this will help you to understand a little bit more about what is going on here. And I probably only get to a few, so that's why I'm just writing this down for you so that you might get it. So let me do this first. All right. Here. So looking at this first here. Okay. What I what I want you to see is that the C stands for creation. The A stands for Abraham. The S stands for Sinai. K stands for kings. E stands for exile, and T stands for temple. Now, why am I sharing this with you? Because this is a really cool way for you to understand the overarching, work that God is doing in the Old Testament. Because when Jesus says, I have come to the lost house of Israel, when he says, is it right for me to give the bread of the children to their dogs? That is beginning to demonstrate that God has a priority in this work of redemption. That there is a way in which God is unfolding his work that we need to understand. And this woman needed to understand, but it didn't exclude her. And she was quick to point that out, to make her case. And Jesus, he responded to her, right? I think that was the response that Jesus was looking for and was just playing along with her because, like I said, Jesus had healed many. And it wasn't dependent on their faith necessarily. It was just the grace and goodness of Jesus to demonstrate his power in this way. So let's talk about this for a moment. All right. So you have C stands for creation. Think about, in the beginning, God creates this world and everything is perfect. There is a harmony within it. It's self-sustaining. God is saying to you and to me that in this environment, we're going to live, we're going to flourish. We have been given a standing as co-regents of all of creation. Because what did God do? When he created Adam and Eve, he created them in his image. So you and I, we bear this mark of the divine. We are made in God's image. And therefore, he places them in the garden and says to them, and he said it to both, that you are going to rule over all of creation. You are to subdue it. You are to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And so here is Adam and Eve receiving this great inheritance, right, that God has just, created, places it in their hands for them to run it. And I think, okay, just hit a pause button there for a moment. God is running all of this creation, and then he calls us into service so that we would accomplish his will and purposes. Does that change? Does that change now that the world has come to a fall? Is God through Jesus not doing the same thing again when he calls his disciples to him and sends them out with power and authority? And as this story in Matthew continues, is not Jesus going to start to tell people that his crucifixion is imminent? That they don't really fully understand, but that the Son of Man has come to give his life a ransom for many? That this call to discipleship now is one that's going to, follow after Jesus' resurrection? That now they are going to be his witnesses filled with power that will now go out into the world? Now you understand why all these lessons that the disciples are getting are so important? Because they need to come to a place where they truly understand who Jesus is, the role that they are to play, the resources that have been given to them. I think about the same way when it comes to the church. I mean, the church is the body of Christ. We are members one of another. We have been called now to go out into the world as light of the world, salt of the earth. And when we neglect to do that, how are you going to fight against the spiritual forces of wickedness when the army doesn't even show up? When you're looking for the Marines over the horizon and nobody's coming. And everybody's home and they're doing their own thing. And God's saying, no, my body is to demonstrate my power, my love, my discipline in a world that is headed in a completely opposite direction. You are representing me out in this world. And that took place all the time in creation. And God is always working through his people. And that's why creation then gives us this big picture of how God intended all things to be. But then what happened? There was a fall, right? And as a result of the fall, we find there was, all of a sudden, the world is demonstrating a brokenness that is beyond repair. So God tries to fix it. And he sends Noah and the flood to cleanse it and to start again. But it's only a matter of time, right? Now, remember we just learned that Sidon was named after Noah's great-grandson. Because Noah had a son named Ham. Ham gave birth to a man named Canaan, who was responsible for all of the progenitors from his line. So all the Girgashites, Hivites, Hittites, all those funny sounding names that we read in the Old Testament, they were all descendants of Canaan. But Canaan's firstborn was a child named Sidon. So you see like how intricate the Bible is. And this is this unfolding. So what does God do? God raises Noah, but it's only a matter of time before it just starts all over again. And God says, never again will I destroy the earth in this fashion. And he puts into the sky a rainbow as a covenant sign of his promise. Well, now, from there, what does God do? Because this is about his work of redemption. This has a plan. So what does God do? God calls Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees. There is no Hebrew nation at this point. There is no Israel. Well, let me back up. God calls Abraham, and now he says to Abraham in a promise that Abraham, I'm going to use you, and I'm going to raise a descendants from you, and they are going to bless all the nations of the world. I'm going to give you posterity. I'm also going to give you prosperity, and I'm going to give you land. But that land is not going to be yours for 400 years. Because during this period, the sin of the Canaanites will reach their limit. And God, so what is God saying? God is already all the way down the end of that track. He knows where all this stuff is headed. He's not surprised. He's telling them straight up, look, I already know what's going to happen. So, but this is not going to happen for 400 years. So Abraham is thinking okay, I've been given this promise, but here I am, an old man. I don't even have a child yet. And God's going to tell me that through me, all the world is going to be blessed. But Abraham believes God. Doesn't understand it all. I read recently someone who said that unbelief and doubt, they're not the same thing. Unbelief is this resistance that just says, nah, that can't be. Doubt is wondering, how can this be? They're very different. And I think as believers, we are always living with a level of doubt that God said, come to me. I will answer those questions. Come to me, learn of me, And you'll find that many of those questions, they begin to be answered over a period of time. Some, it takes longer than others, but there are other questions that I've had in my life of faith that as I've read and I've learned, I'm like, oh, I get it now. I can see what God is doing. And that's what revelation is for. It's to give us this mind of God. So God works through creation, through Abraham, right? To bless all the nations. How about we spend the rest of this week going through this, and I'll make up a slide so we can follow it a little easier. But it's a great way, if you could just remember those two words, casket, empty, and then recognize what each one of those letters stands for. It'll give you an overview of the entire Bible. And in a way, then you begin to see how God's work of redemption is working. That was one of the things, I really do believe that's when Jesus was speaking to this woman, he was saying to her, there is an order to this work of redemption that I have come to accomplish. But the woman was quick to point out, yeah, but I'm a part of that too. And Jesus, he rejoiced, right? He says, your faith, is wonderful, right? Like he says, you have great faith, and your request is granted. See, I don't think that Jesus was ever not going to grant your request. It's just his way of bringing her to that place, and also, I think, for the disciples to see this, so that they don't cut anyone off. They don't think that anyone is beyond the reach of redemption. Not even a woman, a Canaanite woman from the regions of Tyre and Sidon. Of Tyre and Sidon. Well, my friends, the time is gone this morning. Thank you so much for being a part. I trust that you guys are learning, and that together we're unfolding the scriptures so that our faith would be stronger. So we are out seizing the day with an understanding that God is good all the time. Lord willing, we'll spend some more time tomorrow. Until then, enjoy your day. God bless.